I am thrilled to be with all of you today and to welcome you to our 10th annual student convention. I still remember seeing Peggy as a student chapter leader at the first ACS student convention in 2013 at Stanford Law. Since 2013, we've had the privilege of convening at law schools around the country, from the University of Texas to UCLA to Northwestern, Duke Law, and UVA. We look forward to hopefully bringing student convention back in person at Arizona State next year. But for now, we're really pleased to be with you here in this virtual space. For those of you that may not know, the American Constitution Society is the country's foremost progressive legal organization, with over 250 student and lawyer chapters nationwide. We are progressive lawyers, law students, judges, scholars, advocates, elected officials, and many, many more, working together to ensure the law protects and improves the lives of all people. ACS just celebrated its 20th anniversary last year. As part of that work and in honor of our anniversary, we've been exploring the founding failures of our Constitution, particularly as they relate to race and the law. We recognize that racial inequity isn't just rooted in the history of this country. It's rooted in and sustained by our laws and legal systems. That's why at our national convention last year, ACS announced our initiative supporting truth, racial healing, and transformation in the United States. Our work on this initiative falls into 4 buckets: communications and advocacy, research and movement tracking, programming and community education, and mobilization. We believe it is particularly important for the legal community to be active participants in and supporters of truth, racial healing, and transformation, because of how much the history and infrastructure of white supremacy is intertwined with that of our laws and judicial system. It's past time for our profession to help detail and rectify the harms inflicted by the system our laws contribute to and sustain. You'll hear more about this work today from the amazing Dr. Gail Christopher, an award-winning change agent and the driving force behind the movement for truth, racial healing, and transformation. A part of reckoning with our past for a much more just future is finally achieving a judiciary that reflects the diversity of the public it serves. One of our core tenets as an organization is that courts matter, and we know who sits on courts matter. You'll hear more from ACS President Russ Feingold later today about the work of ACS's Path to the Bench project and last week's historic Supreme Court confirmation hearings for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. I know many of us, me included, had a hard time watching the confirmation hearings last week. Judge Jackson's experience in those hearings was painfully familiar to people of color because it is our daily reality in this country. Judge Jackson's poise and grace under those unprofessional and undignified lines of question were beyond impressive. And as Senator Cory Booker said last week, we will not let those senators steal our joy during this historic and long overdue confirmation process. This fact is undeniable. Judge Jackson is exceptionally well qualified to serve on the Supreme Court. And I'm holding out hope that from henceforth, all Black women and girls will finally see themselves on our highest court. I'm also incredibly proud of the work our chapter leaders to strengthen our democracy, including making sure eligible voters can vote on Election Day. Our students have been on the forefront of leading a day of civic service across the country, working to cancel classes on Election Day. ACS chapters across the country have petitioned their universities to not only get their classes canceled that day, but to also mobilize and empower their students to vote and volunteer at the polls as nonpartisan election protection workers, election judges, poll workers, and more. You'll hear more about volunteer engagement opportunities and ways to engage in the 2022 election shortly. It's been a privilege getting to work with students and ACS chapter leaders and helping them realize their potential for creating positive change. We empower the next generation of progressive leaders and support our members' careers, helping them expand their vision of what they can do with their law degrees and helping them make vital connections for jobs and mentorship. We love getting you connected with our inspiring network of judges, lawyers, policymakers, and leaders, and look forward to connecting you with our ACS network during the Inspiring and Empowering Tomorrow's Changemakers panel and the ACS networking tables featuring ACS next generation leaders from across the country. There's so much opportunity for positive change right now. I know that the world is full of heartache, and we are facing enormous challenges right now, from the Supreme Court to individual state legislatures. This is why ACS, our network, our chapters are so important. Let's work together to make a positive difference in your communities and around the country. I'm excited to hear more from you today and to continue to engage with you on this work. Welcome to the ACS Student Convention. I'll pass the mic back to Peggy. Thank you.
Hey everyone, thanks again, Zinelle. So, before we begin our first panel on the 2022 elections, I do want to start out the student convention just celebrating some of the successes and achievements that our chapters have had. So I've invited some of our amazing student leaders to come and talk about the successes that we've had. And I know it's been a challenging few years. So let's get this started on a positive note. There's so much positive change to be made. So let's see, I think I saw Owen at Wash U. Is he ready to speak?
Hey, Peggy, I'm here.
Good. Take the floor.
Hi, my name's Owen Flomberg. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm one of the two co-presidents of the ACS chapter at Washington University in St. Louis. And this year, one of the big priorities that we had was trying to get our chapter to align with all of the great programs that ACS Nationals already has set up for our chapters to use. And one example of that that we have worked to implement at our chapter is the Constitution in the Classroom program. So if you're not familiar with what that is, it's basically ACS Nationals has created all of these great packets for students to use to go teach curriculum at local schools and teach students there about kind of some fundamental like constitutional lessons about their rights and the rights of others in their community. So what we did is we had a lot of trouble trying to get into a school due to COVID restrictions in St. Louis. But what we'll be doing is actually going to visit a local community center, a high school community center, and speaking with the students there. And yeah, I just wanted to stress that Constitution in the Classroom is a really great program, and we're really excited to be participating in it. And also plug that, ACS Nationals already has all of these great things for us to use, and you don't have to recreate the wheel. So we're just going to be taking the specific like high school level curriculum, going there, giving the students their lesson on voting rights, and we're really, really looking forward to it.
Thanks so much, Owen. I remember teaching my first Constitution in the Classroom class, and I didn't know what to expect, but it was just so much fun and exhilarating. And kids had really good questions, especially the littles. Let's see, Emma and Taylor, are you on and available to report out?
Sure. Taylor, are you here? Hello.
If not, we can wait to see if Taylor pops in. Is Elena at Georgetown here?
Hi, Peggy. Hi, everyone. So thank you so much for inviting us to speak. I'm Eliane. I'm one of the outgoing co-presidents at Georgetown. And we worked hard this year to build a series around originalism, and we partnered with Penn Law, so they did an event as well. But our series aims to critique modern originalism as its most prominent contemporary proponents wield it. This conservative originalism presents itself as value neutral and therefore the best, fairest, only method of constitutional interpretation. And through our series, we focused on instead how it is steeped in conservative values and how its so-called value neutrality is a sleight of hand that facilitates deeply conservative and deeply problematic judicial outcomes. Just as problematic is how, in its constant referral to centuries-old meaning and intention, it allows those who wield it to pull America back to a time where many were enslaved and few were enfranchised. And it allows those who wield it to avoid direct responsibility for the impact of their judicial decisions. In our events, originalism is political, originalism is racist, originalism is undemocratic and Penn's originalism is impossible. We explored originalism in relation to these larger policy and moral issues. We hosted Reva Siegel at Yale, Jamal Green at Columbia, Ellie Mistel, and Paul Smith at Georgetown with us, among others. And we have event recordings and write-ups that we hope to compile into a reading list for law students. And during the discussions with chapter leaders and in the events themselves, we've questioned whether it's worth fighting on what's considered the other side's battlefield. Shouldn't we be focused on building rather than just critiquing? And in short, yes, but leaving all of this very problematic terrain unchallenged felt like ceding too much ground, and letting arguments that claim to just follow the text stand without a harder look allows for a lot of dangerous partisan maneuvering. We were inspired to start this series after January 6th. We felt that similar textual arguments were leveraged by members of Congress on January 6th to deny certification of the electoral ballots. As progressives, we believe the text cannot be divorced from its impact, our current context, and the changes our society needs. And through these discussions and resources, we hope to build a generation of students that understand the complexity of our constitutional history and the stakes of our judicial reality. And that's a lot of information, but I'm happy to answer any questions about it. And thank you again, Peggy, for having us.
Of course, I'm going to let everyone go, and if we have time, we'll do some questions. I saw Taylor pop in, so Emma and Taylor.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Emma. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a 1L at Berkeley Law.
And hi, everyone. I'm Taylor McLean. I also use she and her pronouns, and I'm a 2L at the University of Georgia School of Law, and I'm our current president of our ACS chapter.
Great. So we just want to do a brief overview. We are talking a lot about this historic nomination, and Taylor and I were among 4 students who were approached to help draft a letter that would help express the student view of this nomination, including the impact on our lives and our careers. We split up the work evenly. We all worked together really well, even though we were in the middle of briefs and classes and everything. It was great to see. We spoke about Judge Jackson's background, including her experience as an attorney in private practice, a member of the Sentencing Commission, and most notably as a federal public defender, as she would be the first to hold this position on the Supreme Court. And I just want to read you an excerpt of our letter so you can get a sense of our words if you haven't had a chance to read it yet. And then I'm going to pass it to Taylor to explain kind of what the impact since the drafting has been. So the final paragraph of our letter says, as students entering a legal field that is more diverse than ever before, we, the undersigned, believe in a judiciary that reflects the diversity of the people living in America. Through threats to our rights remain, and the theft of Justice Scalia and Justice Ginsburg's seats continue to severely undermine the court's legitimacy, Judge Jackson's nomination is a step forward in recognizing that the court has been and might still be a place where the unheard go to be heard, the unseen go to be seen, and the downtrodden have their day in court. So I'll just pass it to Taylor.
Thanks, Emma. And I've never heard it read out loud before, so that was exciting to hear. It's powerful. I'm going to take just a moment to talk about the impact of the collective efforts of putting the letter together and the reach that it had. So it went really far. Our letter reached over 100 law schools across the country, and over 1,000 people signed the letter to demonstrate their support for the nomination. So thank you to many of you who took part in achieving that. And as we saw, and as Peggy mentioned earlier, the nomination hearings got incredibly tense at times. There was some hostile energy as expected. And there were also some really beautiful displays of respect and appreciation and encouragement for Judge Jackson. And I believe that the demonstrations like this, like our letter, really do make a difference. It's an important token of support. The letter makes a difference in Judge Jackson's experience as she takes this uncharted path to the Supreme Court, in the experience of her family as they stand by her side, and hopefully also in the decision makers who confirm her. And this letter also makes a difference for our ACS community. While working with fellow ACS members like Emma and Jake, who I think I saw on the line too, to and several others to write this letter. And also while looking at the final product and seeing the list of over 1,000 names on the final letter, I felt really comforted and also really energized by the solidarity. So I appreciate getting the opportunity to take part in it. And I hope you all feel those same feelings today as we convene.
Thank you so much, Emma and Taylor. And I'm actually going to invite Jake to speak next on a different topic, but I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Jake, before you talk about your state court series.
Oh, hi everyone. It's so great to be here. My name's Jake. I use he, him as pronouns. I don't have anything to add, really. I think that Taylor and Emma kind of summarized my thoughts. It was just a really, I think, powerful experience, and I was very glad to be a part of it. I want to talk a little bit, and this is kind of a good segue in that we're talking about nominations to the bench, and now I want to talk a little bit about what happens after judges and justices get on, which is, most years we do a federal judge series where we'll bring in a number of judges to chat with our students. And this year, especially, I think the last few years have kind of laid bare for a lot of us the importance of state governments, of state courts, of a progressive kind of federalism approach to our laws. And in so doing, we wanted to expand that judge series to reach out to state Supreme Court justices and a number of state judges. And I think that while obviously the pandemic has been horrible along any number of axes, it has really enabled Zoom programming to kind of take off. And that's been really, really helpful for us in terms of getting people from states, from cities that normally wouldn't be able to travel out east to participate. And so my kind of pitch here, I could talk a little bit about the series. We were able to bring in justices, not only from Connecticut, where we are, but also from Wisconsin, from California, from Colorado, from Minnesota, from Michigan, from Ohio, from all of these places where the work of the Supreme Court, as we see in Ohio right now, is really central to a lot of national concerns and also a lot of kind of local voting rights concerns. So it was great to hear from all of these really wonderful justices. And I would encourage you, if you haven't thought about doing a series focused on state judges, be they state trial, state appellate, or state Supreme Courts, especially in the states that you all are in, I would really encourage you to do so, because I think it was really powerful for our students to hear about something different. So much of what we do in law school is read, federal Supreme Court opinions and read federal court cases and kind of read appellate precedent, not at the state level, but so much of what happens in law happens at the state level. So we really enjoyed the series. I hope that you'll consider something similar, especially if you go to like a large state school, or especially if there are justices who sit on your state Supreme Courts or on your state courts more generally who are alumni of your institutions. I think it was a really excellent opportunity for our students to get a different kind of glimpse at law. And we had a good time, and I hope that you will take seriously the opportunity to bring in state judges and justices.
And I'll add in, if you don't know whether or not a state court judge has ever spoken at an ACS event before, we're happy to check our records to help you as well, but also chat with each other. I know Jake brought in state court judges from all around the country and not just his region. So there are group me threads, there are ways for y'all to interact with each other. So I hope you do that and support one another. Hirsch at Mizzou, are you ready to go?
Yes, I am. So my name is Hirsch Joshi. I use he, his, him pronouns. I have the privilege of serving as Mizzou Law ACS's president. At least I will be for the next 3 months. I'm going to talk about 2 events that, with great support from ACS National, we were able to do. The first was with Attorney General Eric Holder to come in and talk, to Zoom in and talk about voting rights. And I was able to interview him along with the president of the Black Law Student Association. This was February 16th, so only a month and a half ago. It was very impactful, and I think a lot of people enjoyed it, especially because Attorney General Holder is extremely charming. He even made fun of my tie during mic check, and it was quite humbling as an experience, but it was a lot of fun. And then contrast that with our second event, which was only 2 weeks ago, with the Attorney General of Illinois, Mr. Kwame Raoul, who came in and spoke about the importance of the state attorney generals and how protecting the public interest is important, especially when you serve only one state, and how to still be the best advocate for your people. So contrasting those 2 events, I think, led to a lot more discussion here and a little bit more want to be government actors or work for the state or something of that nature. And of course, these two events couldn't have happened with the support of ACS National, namely Peggy, Jumpa, and Megan helped to put these incredible events on. So I'd like to thank them as well.
Thank you so much. I'm going to be beaming throughout the session because y'all are just making me so emotional and happy. The next person we have up is Max at UVA.
Hi, thank you. My name's Max, she, her pronouns. I'm the outgoing student chapter president at UVA. Our incoming president, Sumit, is also on here. I'm going to talk about, we recently did a Truth and Reconciliation hearing panel where we co-sponsored with our Black Law Students Association, which was a great example of just sort of tuning into the ACS national calls that come up about once a month. I don't think anyone in our chapter had really thought that much about the role of Truth and Reconciliation hearings and commissions, even though we're in Charlottesville, so it's pretty relevant. And there's actually a lot of local work going on here. So that sort of inspired us to reach out, talk to one of actually the environmental clinic professor here, because he has a lot of ties locally, and figure out, what is being done in Charlottesville. So we were able to bring in Dr. Selena Kozart, which also fit with one of our goals this year, was bringing in a lot of non-lawyers or non-academic lawyers and trying to think about, what is sort of the holistic legal education and what is the role of a lawyer beyond just talking about theory and doctrine. So we had one of our professors speak with us, and then also with Dr. Selena Kozart, and talk about the history of Charlottesville and the role of these hearings there, the impact of grassroots movements, the idea that these aren't something where you can have someone come into a community and tell you need to have the hearings. It has to come from people having buy-in and having interest and thinking critically about what role can lawyers play, what role can law students play, recognizing that, we are hosted by this community for 3 years, some people here for 7 years, but we're also ultimately leaving. So what responsibilities do we have to both invest in the community, but not make it so that there's so much dependence on it that when we leave, we're leaving people in the lurch. And also talking again in Virginia, understanding the current political climate, what is the role of what has been considered critical race theory? What do we have to do to make sure we're understanding the inequalities in order to be able to actually get at the truth part of Truth and Reconciliation? So that was just a really wonderful example of being inspired by something from nationals, and then, looking deeply at how that really fits with, yes, this really applies to us, particularly because it applies to everyone, but also, we're in Charlottesville. And then just echoing, the incredible support we had from nationals with speakers, and trying to work with, again, like I said, sort of non-academics. We just had a giant Title IX symposium that was really wonderful to bring in lots of practitioners. We had a plaintiff. And I think just kind of continuing the theme of asking, what is the law? Who is it serving? Who is it failing to serve? And what can we do to make sure that the law is including everyone? Thanks.
Thanks so much, Max. Molly from Kentucky.
Hi, everybody. My name's Molly, and I'm the outgoing president for the American Constitution Society at the J.D. Rosenberg College of Law in Kentucky. And so when I first became ACS president, Peggy brought it to my attention that we did not have election day off at UK Law, and that Kentucky was an off-year election state. And I later realized that 5 other states do this as well. And what this means is that Kentucky does not have statewide and local elections on the same year as the presidential election. And ultimately, this results in a lower voter turnout, and the vote is suppressed. And so what I did was send out a student survey with help of our student bar association. And then I wrote like a 20-page civic participation day proposal. And then in the survey, we garnered a total of 151 responses. which work toward like making what I call I'm a minority issue a majority issue. And so while it was focused on the Election Day holiday, the most persuasive points were about majority student opinion as to the questions, like the questions were initially fashioned towards like academic sentiments or sentiments on the academic calendar. And so I believe that the proposal's success was largely due to how the faculty could not deny the realities that students did not have a fall break or they needed extra reading days. And also the fact that we did not have off on election day. So if anyone is curious as to how to get this accomplished similarly at your school, I would love to talk to you about how to create such a survey and a supplementary proposal. And we can think about how this is similar to how lobbying works for state legislatures as well as constituent polling. Often this type of change finds barriers when we speak to law school deans because like legislators, they don't feel like they alone can spearhead such a change. I have even been told that politicians wait for narratives to arise from other places so they don't have to push the narrative themselves. And so while this puts a lot of pressure on us and at the state level, like in Kentucky constituents, it also tells us more confidently what we can and need to do next, as long as we're willing to organize and provide that cohesive information.
Thanks so much, Molly. And I'm about to drop the link to our class cancellation initiative in the chat box. And we have colleagues, Michelle Hurd is on the line who works on staff. She manages this project. And I know she's working with all of the folks who are either working towards class cancellation or who have successfully gotten class cancellation. So she's always happy to get you connected in that network so y'all can collaborate. And perfect timing, it is 12:30. So thank you all for sharing your thoughts. I did get emotional during that. I'm so happy and proud to see all of your successes. Again, it's been a rough 2 years, but seeing all that you've been able to do during this challenging time is just so inspiring. It keeps us going day to day. So thank you all for everything that you do. And I know some of y'all on this line are not involved in ACS chapters yet, either because you're undergrads or maybe there isn't a chapter at your school. If you're also inspired, reach out to us. I think all of you have my email, but I'm excited to work with you to help you grow your chapters at your school. And with that, I will seg it to my colleague, Ashley Erickson, who runs our pro bono projects at ACS.
Thanks, Peggy. So my name's Ashley Erickson. I use she, her pronouns. And I have the opportunity to talk to you just for a few minutes before we start this first amazing panel. So I oversee all of our volunteer and pro bono projects at ACS, but I particularly wanted to speak to you today about specific initiative, and this has to deal with voting and democracy, like election work. This is something that we've done at ACS since our inception, obviously on a nonpartisan basis, but this year we really wanted to strengthen the narrative and our efforts around this, and we've rebranded this into a campaign that's called Run, Vote, Work, that we would love to get you involved with this year. Obviously, we know there's a lot at stake this election cycle. And we know that democracy works best when everyone is engaged. And so we're really committed to protecting the integrity of our elections and protecting democracy through this Run, Vote, Work campaign. This really focuses on advocating for voting rights, nonpartisan redistricting, mobilizing and educating voters about their rights, raising awareness, increasing engagement on down ballot races, and then really connecting all of you with opportunities to get involved to support voting rights and election integrity. The name sort of explains a little bit about the three pillars of what encompasses this. Run, we really want those in our network to run for office, especially to consider down ballot races that a lot of people don't. Vote obviously encompasses voting, but also voter education, volunteering, and then work. We also want all of you to consider working in a Secretary of State office maybe one day, or an Attorney General's office, and really think about supporting election integrity that way as well. And this initiative really encompasses so much of our work, including our State Attorneys General project, the national and local programming that we do on democracy and elections, election protection work, Constitution in the Classroom, which you heard about earlier. One of those sets of lesson plans includes talking about voting rights. Our election day class cancellation, which you also heard about, not only gives you an opportunity to vote on election day, but we really want to like cancel classes so that all of you can volunteer on election day as well, in great nonpartisan ways. And one of the ways that I really want to emphasize that we would love for you to get involved this year is as poll workers. Being a poll worker is a great way for you to directly support democracy and especially election security, which we know is being undermined right now. There's a lot of disinformation, a lot of proponents of the big lie, and we really need really great poll workers everywhere around the country. And we know that there's really been a shortage in the last few years. And so what we've done, and I know Peggy's going to drop some links into the chat so that you can both see our Run Vote Work initiative, but we've launched this poll worker pledge on our website, and we would really love for all of you to sign up and commit to being a poll worker in your local area this year. So there's a really quick, easy pledge that you can take. Committing for this 2022 election cycle. It provides more information about how to sign up. We'll be sending you reminders to make sure you do that, because they're both opportunities to work as poll workers for both your local primaries and for obviously the national elections in November, and then also to recruit your friends and family to get involved as well. Because this is really such an effort that we all need to take part in, and we really need people to help support election integrity this year. So please check out these pages and these links. Think about doing that. And especially, as I said before, this goes hand in hand with class cancellation. So if you haven't thought about class cancellation at your school, if classes aren't canceled on election day, it's a great thing to partner with as well, so that you can get classes canceled and then you can become a poll worker on election day. So thanks for hearing me out on that. I hope you consider getting involved. And I am going to turn over the time to Chris to introduce our amazing panel.
Thanks, Ashley. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Lynn, he, him, based in Philly. And we have some amazing speakers today. And I want to make sure you have as much time to hear from them and interact with them. So I'm going to skip the long bio reads because you can go look those up online. And I thought we'd start with Aklima Khondoker, who is the Chief Legal Officer of the New Georgia Project, and we'll be discussing the landscape of voting rights today.
Hello, and thank you for that introduction. Again, my name is Aklima Khondoker. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Chief Legal Officer at the New Georgia Project, the New Georgia Project Action Fund. So a bit about my work and where I come from. I come from a world where previous to being a lawyer, I was a crisis center counselor. And then I did research with the New York State Psychiatric Institute, specifically looking at how crisis affects and impacts families across the world. This work led me to pursuing a career in the law, because a lot of the issues that were coming in locally that I was handling had to do with domestic issues, legal issues that I couldn't touch. So I became a lawyer. And in doing that work, I recognized that one of the ways to fundamentally change the fabric of your community and access to power within your community is to have the right to vote. And so what that meant for me is I cultivated a career that used organizing, advocacy, and the law to make sure that everybody in the community has equitable, fair, and free ballot access. I worked as the staff attorney at the ACLU of Georgia, where I worked on advocacy strategies specifically intended to expand ballot access. I created the Voting Access Project at the ACLU that's designed specifically to look at different strategies that lawyers can use to ensure that the community can be empowered through their vote. So we looked at policy, we looked at advocacy tactics, and we also considered litigation to ensure that everybody can access the ballot. Post that work, I put my legal hat up, I let my bar number kind of chill on the shelf, and I worked as a state director at the Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights, where I worked over the 2020 and 2021 election to ensure that more Georgia voters could gain access to the ballot. I worked on opening early vote sites in primarily communities of color. I worked on getting drop boxes installed in more locations, particularly in immigrant communities that have suffered voting location loss in the wake of the Shelby v. Holder decision. After my time there, I am now stationed at the New Georgia Project, where my work involves ensuring that our team, number one, understands the implications of voting rights suppression laws that make it more difficult for people to vote. When we have more time to talk, I'll tell you a bit about what's happening in Georgia with a law known as SB 202, Georgia's voter suppression law that is dubbed as election integrity. There's no integrity in it, spoiler alert. It's actually a method used to make it more difficult for communities of color to work by diminishing access within these communities. All of these things that I have stated are just an example of how my previous life has led me to this one, and to hopefully highlight to y'all that there are several ways that you can use your law degree to make an effective and impactful difference in your communities. There are ways to do it, even if you do not have that voting rights experience, even if you do not come into this field with that knowledge, you can build that knowledge, and you can also use community organizing within that knowledge. So I'm excited to have a more robust conversation with you all about this work, and how you can participate over the midterm elections, and keep in mind that your local elections still matter and will be impactful to your community. All of that and more in a few, but thank y'all so much for having me. Excited to talk some more.
Thank you so much, Aklima. And yes, a big theme throughout this entire panel today will be the multiple ways you can get engaged with a legal degree, both in a formal role and in a volunteer role. So that we next transition to Amy Larsen, who is currently a director at Microsoft's Democracy Forward campaign.
Thank you so much, Chris. And hey, everyone. I know after 2 years of Zoom, this might not be your necessarily ideal format for getting together with folks, but we've come a long way, and I'm really looking forward to being back in person. Hopefully we'll get to meet some of you over the summer. And I just want to take a minute, first of all, to say thank you to the ACS national leadership, and to my amazing co-panelists for their experiences and contributions so far, and to all of you, the students who, throughout this challenging time, you haven't given up, you keep showing up. I just want you to know that we see you, we care about you, we need you. And we're so grateful that you're here, that you're part of this community. We want to help take care of you as you grow into full blossomed lawyers, and support the work you do on your careers and trajectory, no matter where it takes you. So just wanted to acknowledge that, and say really appreciate you showing up on a Saturday. And this fight isn't always easy, but you're in it with good company and a lot of people who really care about the future of this country and democracy. So we need you, you belong here. And thank you for the work you've already done and will continue to do. So I'll just tell you a little bit about my experiences, and a little bit about the work of Microsoft in this space, and then a little bit about disinformation. I'll leave a lot of the kind of details to the Q&A to sort of hear what's really interesting to you guys. But I'm Amy Larsen, she, her, hers, and I grew up in the Bronx. I'm the first lawyer in my family. It's a big honor to do that. And my path has been sort of an effort to discover where I can have the most impact over time and space. I worked before law school as in politics. I was in the first Obama White House in Congress, and worked for the State Department overseas, the first in my family to do any of that. So it was a bit like a touch tunnel where you're figuring out where to make your way and how to do that. And then I practiced law for several years in big law. I was at Davis Polk for a while. Yes, go Bronx. And I was at Davis Polk, and then at Morrison and Forrester. My practice developed, I was working on cybersecurity issues, election protection pro bono work, some national security work, some crypto work. I really, and I'd be happy to kind of continue the conversation with folks, but I think it's really important to kind of try to carve out the path that really resonates with your values and interests. It may not be there to begin with, but to the extent that you can kind of help shape it as you go, that will improve the institutions, whatever they are, that you are a part of. And that work matters, even if it's a little bit opaque, how to make that happen at the outset or at various points. After a while, some of the pro bono work that I did involved a lot of election protection work, some domestic violence work, immigration work. And one of my pro bono projects was working with the Brennan Center for Justice and actually with this Microsoft team that I now work for on trainings, creating a series of trainings for election officials in the lead up to the 2020 elections. In the cyber field, we call them like tabletop exercises, kind of crisis simulation exercises that you develop to kind of put people through their paces and think ahead of time about the different things that could go wrong, and sort of then think about what kinds of responses are best if confronted by some of those situations. I like to think of that a little bit as, you know, I was already worrying a lot in 2020. And so this is kind of a productive form of worrying that actually, you know, enabled people to really think about how they could confront those situations in advance. And so after several years of practicing law, I had never, I'll be honest, I never dreamed of being a law firm partner. And I think that's okay, you know, whatever path kind of calls to you, and that can unfold as you make your way. I think honor that and sort of look for what makes sense. And similar to Aklima, I hung up sort of the official practicing part of my law degree a little while ago when I joined Microsoft. And I've joined as chief of staff of Microsoft's Defending Democracy program. And the work of this initiative and this program involves a lot of different types of projects and partnerships to preserve, protect, and advance the fundamentals of democracy. There are a couple different ways Microsoft tries to do this, and my team tries to do this. There's sort of one group of work that involves promoting a healthy information ecosystem. And this work involves sort of the preserving local journalism efforts that we undertake, the combating disinformation and fake news work that we are engaged in, and a number of other civic literacy, media literacy, digital literacy programs, because, you know, democracy is a bottom-up activity. So if we're not all kind of on the same page about the importance of facts, truth, and how to digest and promote those from the bottom up, and in the digital era, which adds a lot of layers of complication, then we're in trouble. Yes, Brianna, I do work with Matt Masterson. He's terrific. He's our director of information integrity. And another one of our pillars is safeguarding open and secure democratic processes. That involves our cyber work, some of the hard tech work that we have a lot of sister teams that kind of help map out the threat landscape as that applies to cyber activity, disinformation, other threats. And we also have technologies that sort of work to protect the vote as well. And then the third pillar is advocating for corporate civic responsibility, and that's both internally focused and externally focused. And we have a lot of different partners and projects in each of those different pillars. There's a lot I could say about disinformation, sort of looking back and looking forward. I think obviously all of you know that there's no one silver bullet here, but I think what's important to keep in mind, and this is something Ashley talked about a little bit at the outset, is that we really need people to be involved and step up. And we can talk some more about what that actually looks like. But, you know, in essence, you know, there will always be these armies of trolls. And what we really need to begin to counter that are champions of truth. You know, it really matters to speak up. It really matters to combat fake information with truthful information, and to direct people to accurate sources of information, including local elections offices, which are transparent and bipartisan and run by amazing professionals at the local level. And engaging in a proactive measure, in a proactive way with your virtual and in-person communities. You know, I think we need more than being a bystander to mis and disinformation. We really need engagement and activity and speaking up. You know, truth doesn't defend itself, and it really needs champions and advocates. And that's part of the way that we, I think, honor the foundations of this country, of democracy, of rule of law. Is that it takes all of us to make a difference, whether that's becoming a poll worker, serving as an election observer, participating in voter protection hotlines. I think I did that almost every night in October 2020. Was womaning the phone lines, and I think thinking about both the activities that you can do in your local community, and on the individual level, on the family level, on the community level, on the chapter level, really being aware of any changes in state voting laws, like Virginia allowing same-day voting registration, things like that. I think that's a role that ACS chapters around the country can play, being a really reliable source of information and facilitating the pathways and connections to state, local election offices and things like that. So yeah, I'll pause there, I think, to give you all a chance to think about some questions, but bottom line up front, we really need your activity and energy and all your hard work, and every day between now and November 2024 really matters, including these midterm elections. So if you're ever looking for something to do, reach out to me, any of our panelists, any of our ACS national folks, and we'll get you involved. So thanks.
Awesome, thank you, Amy. And as you've heard from both Aklima and Amy, an important way to get engaged in this work is at the local level. And so finally, we have Brianna Lennon, who was elected as the Boone County Clerk in Missouri, to discuss some of the ways we get involved in that capacity.
Hi, and thank you. I think it's been covered before how important that this convening is, and the work that everyone is doing at their own law schools. I was not with it enough in law school to join ACS, so I've been a past, I'm an alumni member, I guess, for the Mizzou chapter, or at least somewhat involved. But I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to everyone today. My path to working in the county clerk's office, if you talk to pretty much any person that is an elected official, like a local election official or a state election official, they will tell you that there is no direct path to working in elections, and most people end up working there accidentally. And that was primarily the case for me as well. I graduated law school and went into the Attorney General's office, worked as a consumer protection and antitrust attorney, which was interesting, but I had done some internships with the League of Women Voters and a few other election-related organizations, and we had some turnover in our Secretary of State's office in Missouri around the same time that I was looking to switch over. I've always worked in the government, but I had wanted to work on the election side. So I started as the elections counsel for the elections division in the Secretary of State's office, and eventually moved to the deputy director position, and very much enjoyed that. But the core part of my work, aside from working on legal issues, was working directly with county clerks, local election authorities on not necessarily advising, because that's not the structure of most election officials. The Secretary of State doesn't always get to dictate exactly how things happen at the local level, but fielding questions, providing trainings, documenting things, and just kind of feeling out what working as a local election authority was like. And after doing that for a few years, I decided that while I enjoyed the higher level work of state legislative, advocacy at the Secretary of State's office to be able to pass things, you could see from talking to county clerks and local election authorities that regardless of how the law looks and regardless of what the words of the law are, the implementation is actually done at the local level. So if you are passing really good laws, that's great. But if you have county clerks that don't know how to, or don't agree, or don't have the resources to implement them in the way that you anticipated them being passed, then the voters are not getting a benefit from that law. So I thought about it for a while and decided to jump into county government, because on the flip side, when negative legislation gets passed and things that you can see are going to hurt voters get passed, you have the opportunity at the local level to help implement it in such a way that voters are not as negatively impacted by that law. You can do more voter education, you can do more outreach, you can make decisions that lessen the negativity of the law in some ways. And one of the things in Missouri always ends up being, law changes at the last minute, especially with COVID. And so those are all things we've been able to successfully implement. And it's worked out very well. A lot of the advertising and voter education that we did in the county that I'm in was picked up by other counties in Missouri. So it's kind of a job where what you put into it is what you get out of it. So as I've been the county clerk for the last 4 years, there's a lot of opportunities to work not just on your own county's work, but we have associations. There are national task force. There are things, as Amy was saying, the tabletop exercises. I've done several of those with the Brennan Center. There's just a lot of opportunities to use your law degree in a creative way. I am one of 2 attorneys out of the 116 local election authorities in the state of Missouri. And I find that it serves me very well when it comes to our legislative advocacy and our implementation of certain things. A lot of other clerks will ask me how I'm doing something here because they trust that I have a grasp of how that's going to be, whether we're going to get challenged in court on it, whether they feel comfortable implementing something in a certain way. And so at a very, depending on the size of your jurisdiction, you're going to be hitting a lot of voters, you're going to be impacting a lot of voters, and you can step in when you know that there are issues that are happening. I had done very similar election protection work and worked as a poll worker in other offices and things like that too. But having the ability to, when a voter says that they have a problem, make the change right then to fix it is it's a really great thing. It's one of the things that I like the most about my job. And I think we should have more attorneys running for county clerk positions and local election offices. As we were talking about before, misinformation and disinformation is definitely on the rise. A lot of my colleagues are facing very severe threats and are leaving the field. We're having just a huge number of people that are saying that they don't want to put up with it anymore. And in most cases, this is not the only work that's being done in my office. Elections is only one part of what my office does. So even though it takes up all of that space and all of that attention, I'm still having to do all the other parts of county government to make sure that they function. So it can be challenging, it can be stressful. A lot of the smaller offices do not pay very well, but it's a very rewarding career and one that I think is gaining in recognition in terms of the importance that it plays in making sure that elections are run well and voters are served well.
Thank you, Brianna. So I have some questions prepared for the group, but we hear too much from ACS National anyway. Today's the day for the students. And so students, feel free to unmute yourselves, raise your hand, and I'll let you take forward action. Don't be shy. Who wants to ask a question first? All right, I'll start then, since probably around lunchtime if you're getting hangry, I guess. So Aklima, you mentioned, a lot of the work that's being done today by voter suppression is under the guise of election integrity. So wondering if you could discuss some of the efforts that are underway to suppress voter rights and what can we do against that kind of messaging?
Certainly. So number one, I think that we've all seen that there have been tons of local, state sanctioned legislation designed to improve our elections, so they claim, but ostensibly they've been created to combat the mis and disinformation we've heard about our elections over the 2020 election. So essentially for the state of Georgia, what we heard and what the nation heard was the then President Donald Trump asking our Secretary of State for 1,400 votes so that he could win the election, alleging that there was fraud within our election system, alleging that there were weaknesses within our infrastructure to make people assume that we had a sham election here because it didn't go the way that they wanted it to go. And I just want to emphasize for everybody here, I've always worked with nonprofits and nonpartisan organizations, so this is the place in which this message is coming from. What we saw is that there were tons of litigation that was filed in Georgia. There were investigations, there were audits that proved there's no evidence of fraud or tampering within our elections infrastructure, no hidden ballots anywhere. There aren't poll workers there that are tampering with our elections. But unfortunately, this is where the politicization of voting tends to be harmful for our communities. The act of voting is something that is nonpartisan. It's available to everyone, regardless of your ideological background. However, if you let political ideology cloud your judgment, then that means you're going to push for measures to make it more difficult for others to vote in order to ensure that you are able to keep your political seat. And that's what we saw happen here in Georgia with SB 202. SB 202 is a Frankenstein's monster of a bill, 98-page omnibus bill that was passed through pretty much under the cover of darkness here in Georgia. For folks who have been noting what's been happening in Georgia and other states, you may have noticed Governor Kemp signing this bill behind closed doors into law, while a representative, Park Cannon, was taken away by the police because all she wanted was transparency into that process, but she was pushed away and locked out. Why is that imagery important? That imagery is important because that is how that bill even came to be. The state legislature said there were issues related to fraud and integrity. Again, no evidence of that, but still pushed this law that would reduce ballot access by reducing the amount of ballot access, the amount of drop boxes statewide. So here in the state of Georgia, we recommend to have at least one ballot drop box for every 15 to 18,000 voters. SB 202 cut that down to one to every 100,000 voters, or each early vote site, whichever is less. For those who have been following voter suppression tactics over time, in 2013 with the Shelby v. Holder decision, the provision that removed the pre-clearance requirement for states to clear changes with the DOJ, that meant that the state of Georgia closed over 200 polling sites, primarily in Black and Brown communities. So now with a law like SB 202 that further reduces access by saying that now drop boxes must be reduced to match the amount of early vote sites after those sites have already been diminished because of the Shelby v. Holder decision, that means less ballot access for those communities. And less ballot access, intentional provisions to deny access to the ballot for certain communities, is voter suppression. When people think about voter suppression, I think oftentimes we have black and white imagery of our minds when we see things like Jim Crow laws, poll taxes, literacy tests, those overt systems that are intended to disenfranchise certain communities. That's typically what we think about. But we don't think about how state legislatures are also doing this and what they're prefacing these moves on. Here in Georgia and in other states, they're prefacing that on disinformation from the big lie. And the way that they're doing it is through election administration, through targeting our local elections. So the ballot drop box restrictions is a big one. Another really big one is reducing absentee ballot request times. Here in Georgia, you had 180 days to do so. Under SB 202, that's been shortened significantly to 77 days. So if you are a voter who's used to voting absentee and you don't understand the ins and outs of these laws, then you think you have more time than you do when you actually have much less. And unfortunately, voter education, the areas where we need emphasis, focus, and resources is also coming up short here in Georgia and in other states. So voters don't even know the ramifications of this law and how it impacts their options to vote. I mentioned drop boxes. I talked about early vote sites. I talked about absentee ballots, vote by mail. All of these are voting options. When you start to chip away at our voting options, you chip away at our access to our democracy, and that is voter suppression. It's especially egregious when it targets communities of colors, those communities who typically do not have access to early vote sites or vote sites in general, what I mentioned about what happened in 2013 with the Shelby v. Holder decision. If you don't have access to your sites, if you are someone who's also limited in your resources because historically your community has felt the effects of discrimination in such a way where you don't have access to jobs or education, the way that other people in your community have, you typically are an hourly wage worker. What does that mean if you now cannot use a drop box, but are required to find an early vote site that operates between the hours of 9 to 5? And what does that mean if you used to have 180 days to cast your ballot to vote absentee, but now that request time is slashed to 77, you're less likely to vote. You have less time to think about that as you are trying to tend to your family, tend to your community's needs. So very generally, the way that vote suppression spreads and the way that local legislation or state legislation does that is by chipping away at our voting rights and further weakening the fabric of our democracy through opinions that have done that through the Supreme Court. Let's consider Shelby v. Holder, through other local initiatives that do that, SB 202 that chose to, where the drafters chose to adopt the big lie to make it more difficult for people to access the ballot. And then when we look at how this affects you in the community, this means if you come from a particular demographic, it's far more difficult for you to vote, and it's targeted towards you because folks have an idea about the way that you might vote. If you are an unmarried woman, if you are a member of an LGBTQ community, if you are Black or brown or an immigrant voter, if you are a Spanish-speaking voter, people tend to believe that you're going to vote a particular way. And so they limit your access, and that is voter suppression.
So thank you. So I see Anne-Marie has a question in the chat, and then we'll go to Jake and Owen next before we go to breakout rooms. So Anne-Marie's question is if anyone has any thoughts on ranked choice voting and pluses and minuses, or what might be a barrier to implementing it.
So I'm happy to talk a bit about the election-related myths and disinformation, just because I think that kind of takes the position from whence I was speaking already. So let's talk about that a little bit. But if anybody wants to talk about ranked choice voting, that would be a lot for me. But I will cover this other piece of the question. So election-related myths and disinformation and how that's affecting and impacting our elections. It's important to note that a lot of people in Georgia and nationwide buy into the fact that our presidential election was stolen. And we see that through how people have shown up to push back against those who are merely trying to access the ballot and those who are trying to administer our elections successfully, effectively, and safely. So what we saw is that disinformation about our elections has caused several insular groups on social media to come together to spread lies about our elections, spread lies and racist rhetoric about the people who participate in our elections. And what did that lead to? Well, that led to, number one, we saw in the state of Georgia predominantly sent to Black Democrats lies about when voting day was. In other words, vote on November 1st. Vote on this other date instead. Show up at this wrong location. So we have trolls that are telling people to show up to vote at a wrong time, knowing that they're not going to have access to the ballot because they don't want their voice to be counted. They don't want their vote to be counted. What this means for election administration, those heroes that are tasked to making sure that the community can access our democracy, is that they were doxxed. They were harassed. They were being followed. They were being intimidated out of doing their jobs. And what that recipe does is essentially creates what we saw on January 6th. It is the prime recipe for insurrection and political violence from disinformation. So that's what we saw. That's how important it is for us to have truth in our elections, because it leads to violence. And this isn't violence that our democracy is unfamiliar with. This is violence that our democracy, unfortunately, has always been fighting against. So this is a fight that we know that we always have to fight, but we are prepared to do that. And there are ways around that. I don't know if that was part of the question, but I of course want to pause to allow our panelists to tackle pieces of that question.
I can just jump in briefly, and I think that's all totally right, and really appreciate those insights. And I'll just add that you know, the trolls have always been there and have used whatever tools they have had at their disposal. I worked in the field in the 2020 or the 2012 elections, and I was out in rural Colorado, and I remember working in, there's a Latino area that I found some flyers in Spanish that had that were explaining that election day was actually a different day. And so it doesn't have to be online. It does, and I think the point is that those who want to disrupt and suppress and maintain their advantages will use whatever tools, digital or otherwise, that they can. And so at that point we mounted an effort where we responded in Spanish and went and flyered and talked to people, and and basically it's the same concept, right? Like, all of these technologies and virtual spaces are values agnostic, right? They don't actually have democracy or democratic values built in. And that's one of the reasons that Microsoft really cares about trying to be a responsible stakeholder in this area, is that we want to try to be on the side of doing good. And, because if we let technologies only exist in the hands of those who would use them to suppress and gain advantages, then we're not doing what we need to be doing. And so I think it takes a lot of efforts wherever you are in whatever space you occupy to kind of call out the bad behavior and the lies, and run against folks on the ballot who are not standing for progressive values and inclusion and democracy and rule of law, and call it out where you see it, whether it's digital or analog. And this is where kind of the rubber meets the road in terms of being champions of truth. It actually requires action, and not just kind of staying in our own information ecosystems and silos and communities. We have to engage out in on the ballot and at the polls, and in positive, peaceful, healthy, nonpartisan ways. And I think thinking about ways that you can do that in safe and responsible manners, and ways that you can do that and maintain your sense of well-being are all really important. But it does take action and activity and being responsible stewards and champions in whatever spaces we're occupying.
I will speak really quickly about the ranked choice voting portion of it from a logistics standpoint. So the biggest issue with ranked choice voting nationally is that voting equipment is not standardized across the country. It's not even standardized across states. And this is something that we've been talking about in Missouri anyway, because there have been a number of initiatives to implement ranked choice voting on the state level. So the reason why it is important for the voting machines to have some sort of way to do ranked choice voting counting is because individually, I will use Missouri as an example, our 116 jurisdictions are all counting different ballots, but they're all counting ballots for the same race if you're looking at a statewide race. So if you want to do ranked choice voting for governor in Missouri, you would have to have some way of aggregating all of those ballots together, which are all located at our individual offices. And then you would have to have some way of being able to tabulate them once you got them all together, even though they're all different pieces of paper, and they're all programmed differently, because depending on what kind of machine you have, it might depend on whether you have little timing marks around the outside of your ballot or you have some other kind of programming that's on your ballot. So that is a logistical challenge that pretty much any state that is talking about a statewide ranked choice voting system has. Maine obviously has it. There are states that have been implementing it, but if you look at many of the places that have ranked choice voting, it's on a municipal level. It's Minneapolis, it's New York City, where they have full control and full authority over all of the ballots. So partly it's that logistical issue of how do we get voting machines that are going to be able to do that? Do we have the money to pay for voting machines that are going to be able to do that? And then it does somewhat come into that misinformation, because one of the simplest ways to say, okay, well, we don't physically have all of the paper ballots together, because we're a paper ballot state, Missouri, is, well, what if we took all of the images of the ballots and we tabulated those instead? That is a cybersecurity nightmare waiting to happen. To say that we're going to call an entire election on a statewide level by only looking at the ballot images with no way of auditing them and no way of making sure that they have not been tampered with, just inputting them into a system and saying, what, we counted them because we aggregated them from all the counties, does not help in the narrative of our elections not being able to be tampered with or affected in some way by a cybersecurity attack. So there are just a lot of small things that kind of add up, which is why I usually stay away from talking about the theories of ranked choice voting and whether you get better candidates or whether you don't, or things like that. From the clerk's perspective, we look at how is it actually going to work and how are we going to teach our voters to do this? Because the other thing that you need is a really robust education campaign, because voters that are not used to doing it will not do it correctly. And that means longer times at the polling place, filling out the ballots, which means longer lines, which means longer days and unhappy voters. So there's a lot of things that come into it when we're looking at it from our perspective. It's not insurmountable. None of it's insurmountable. It just requires resources and planning and cooperation at a lot of levels of government.
So I know we had breakout scheduled, but this discussion is going so I thought we'd just stay in this big group and hear from each other. So I know Jake had a question. Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi all. So there's been a lot of really excellent discussion about like how we communicate to vote, or how we all communicate to voters around like changing deadlines, or like making sure they can get their ballots in, or like following kind of the established rules and norms. I'm curious, and I think you touched a little bit on this, but I'm curious if you could talk more directly about how you kind of message court rulings around voting to people that communicates them in like a clear way without leading to a loss of faith. Because I frequently lose faith when I read the Brnoviches and the Shelby counties and the most recent ruling against the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Like that, I'm in an election law class right now, and I feel bad for the professor, as I feel like election law changes for the worse like every 2 minutes. And so I'm curious how you all not only keep the faith yourselves, but also keep the faith when you're communicating how courts are refashioning the Voting Rights Act into other kind of key pieces of election law to voters that you're interacting with.
Thank you so much for your question, Jake. I'm happy to answer this question. So I will say this, here at the New Georgia Project, we focus on civically engaging Georgians. We focus on voter registration, but we have a huge field and organizing operation. So we are primarily a grassroots organization. So some of the things that we do to make sure that people have sufficient information is we use social media, because we are invested in making sure that the folks who are young voters new to this voting space understand that we are speaking their language. We don't bring the heavy language of a Supreme Court decision into conversations casually. We understand our audience. So we come up with cute Instagram squares where I will break down what a decision actually means, but I'll also break down what it is you can do to make sure that you get your vote in on time. But not only that, because we have a robust sampling of people that we serve, we're innovative about it. So we create video games. We recently created This Is Not a Game, available on iOS and Android, that is a match 3 style game that teaches you about the fundamentals of democracy and teaches you to not feel hopeless under the weight of the quote man that might make it more difficult for you to be a part of this system. So it's literally a match 3 style game against Mr. System that is setting up systems of oppression, AKA ballots and barriers to the ballot, to make it more difficult for you to vote. And you as a voter, you as someone that's trying to engage within your community, is just getting through the bubbles. And as you get through the bubbles, you get to learn more about our democracy, more about why that's important and how that's important, and you get details depending on where you are about how to participate effectively. So we consistently push out information to folks where they are. So over 2020, one of the things that we did is Twitch the Vote. We know that Twitch, especially during the pandemic, for those who are gamers out there who like to build worlds, that's what our democracy is about. So that's what we married here at NGP. We married this idea of building a world, building a democracy that's worthy of the community that is a part of it. And we know that that's what you're doing when you're gaming. So we did that over National Voter Registration Day and over National Black Voter Registration Day. And in a single day, we had over 9,000 people register and sign up to vote, to come up with a voting plan and engage other people to bring them along with them. Now, we know that these platforms, I've talked about center in on youth voting and having that dialogue with those folks, but we do this across all spectrums of society. So for example, Georgia is a very rural state. For those who haven't been here, they may think Atlanta is it, but Atlanta is just the middle of the sort of metropolitan area of our state. We have rural communities that don't have universal broadband access, but what we do have are thousands of volunteers who knock on doors, who canvass, and who have door hangers. So where folks may not have access to digital resources, we constantly update them with paper resources. We constantly tell them, hey, if you want to follow up about any of the issues that are important to you, if you want to know more about our elections, here's how you can get in touch. And we are forward facing with giving them that information. So in sum, when it comes to big court decisions, we number one understand our audience. Who are we talking to? Not everybody's a lawyer, and these are dense decisions, and they can drain your hope. But we try to make sure that we are doing the outreach where we truncate the information, we make it relatable, but then we give you solutions. Here's your toolkit. Here's what you need to make sure that you participate. Here's how you continue to hold out hope, and here's how we can change our democracy together.
That is so awesome. Can I just jump in here? That sounds like an amazing approach, and I really want to follow you on Instagram and check out those Instagram squares. That sounds fantastic. Just kind of a couple other sort of more different layers of the answer to your question a little bit, Jake. First is I think gamification has been pretty effective at helping people engage voters and citizens. Ahead of the 2020 elections, Microsoft worked with the University of Washington, the Center for the Informed Public, to create like a Stop the Deepfakes quiz. And we've also partnered with other partners, NGOs and otherwise, to kind of gamify some sort of difficult concepts. And I think that has been effective and useful. We also used our Xbox platform to spread information on voter registrations and voter registration days in different states, and registered a ton of voters that way. So would love to chat with you more, Aklima, about some of that as well later. Yeah, you know, and I think that's the short-term answer, right? Of like, how do we sort of break down concepts? I think, you know, progressives aren't always the best at messaging. So understanding the audience and how to like move it from like facts and figures to sort of more digestible and fun messaging is a great development. And then more broadly, if we don't actually like the answers that are coming out of X or Y legislative or court body, like that's where we need to step up and run for those offices and take notes from Federalist Society and how well they encourage people to fill those sets of elected positions. So there's the short-term answer and the longer-term vision for how we really create the kind of progressive, inclusive democracy that we believe in.
From mine, I mean, because we're the government, so we're speaking on behalf of what we're going to be able to implement. We have been diversifying our social media, but we've, you know, our role is really to just make sure that our voters feel comfortable being able to cast a ballot. And so we're providing the information accurately to put that out. It sometimes can be challenging because you have a lot of voters call in a panic because they've heard that something happened, but it didn't actually impact Missouri, and it didn't actually impact them here, but they heard and they believe. And they do not believe me when I say, no, we're not a photo ID state, because they heard that photo ID was happening. And I have to then do education undoing some of that that they've heard, because it was maybe going to pass. And they heard that maybe it was going to pass, but it didn't actually pass. So a lot of my messaging changes throughout the year, but depending on what the legislation I know is being debated or what court cases are happening. And I try to get out ahead of it and say, this passed, this is the impact that it has on you right now, which is usually none. But so in Missouri, we are not allowed to have, for example, we're not allowed to have ballot drop boxes anyway. We've never been allowed to have ballot drop boxes. We were going to maybe have ballot drop boxes at some point. And the Secretary of State's office started letting people know we were going to be able to get ballot drop boxes. And then we could not have them, not because the state law didn't allow them, but because it just ended up where the Secretary of State said, never mind, we don't want you to have ballot drop boxes. So I went to our post office and said, hey, would you install a USPS box outside my office that I will put a big sign on that says ballot drop box, because they can mail them to me and they can come to my office and they can put it in the mailbox and it will say ballot drop box because everybody heard ballot drop box. So legally, a post office box is not a ballot drop box, but it's not a ballot drop box. So we did education on here's where we have ballot drop boxes. We have one that we just got installed outside of our office. We have one down at the post office that we put a big sign on so that people could drive up and put it in one of the outside mailboxes. And then there was one inside the mail office that we had where if you walk into the post office and we're using one of those ones that you pulled down the lever and then put the mail in, we had a sign on that as well. And so then people thought, oh, look, we do have ballot drop boxes, but it was really just post office boxes. But then they knew, okay, well, I still have a way to do this. And working with the post office, they treated the ballots differently. We had them make sure that they were getting to us on a daily basis, and we were able to do all those things. So a lot of it is just creativity. It's also what keeps you kind of your spirit up when you see bad stuff coming down, is if you can creatively come up with a way that voters are still being served, then it's kind of fun.
I wish we could keep this discussion going all day. It's been amazing to hear from you all. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but we have an amazing panel at 1:30 with Dr. Christopher. And again, just want to thank Aklima, Brianna, and Amy for taking the time this afternoon to share your expertise with us. And we have a bit of a break before 1:30. So students, relax, stretch, see you back at 1:30.